talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Is Rishi Sunak backpedalling on Brexit? That's a question we'll be asking this morning as he's due to address the CBI conference within the next hour. We'll be exploring the situation with regards to this country and our relationship with the European Union, whether or not we accept their laws, and migration, of course. That on top of new house building rules they'll be voting on Wednesday, and Russia's war on everybody. What's all that about? All to come after the headlines.
A very good morning to you, 9:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Prime Minister is going to address business leaders today amid a backdrop of tax rises and spending cuts in the country. Rishi Sunak is expected to focus on innovation in his speech at the Confederation of British Industry conference in Birmingham. The CBI have called on the government to end arguments over Brexit and to use immigration to help grow the economy. Well, it comes just days after the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, unveiled £25 billion of tax rises in his autumn statements. A 31-year-old man's been arrested on suspicion of murder following the death of two young children at a fire in Nottingham. Fire and rescue were called to a flat in Farage, close to Clifton, in the early hours of yesterday morning. The children, aged 1 and 3, were treated at the scene for smoke inhalation, but later died in hospital. A woman in her 30s remains in a critical condition. A woman who left the UK to join the so-called Islamic State when she was 15 years old is going to appeal the removal of her UK citizenship today. Shamima Begum fled her East London home for Syria more than 7 years ago. The Supreme Court ruled she was not allowed to come back to the UK to fight her British citizen case against the Home Office after it was revoked when she was found in a Syrian refugee camp. She's denied any involvement in terror activities. England and Wales begin their quest for glory in the FIFA World Cup today. It'll be the first time that Wales has played in the tournament in 64 years. Well, they'll take on the United States tonight. England play Iran this afternoon. The England manager, Gareth Southgate, says his players will take the knee before the opening match. It's not known yet whether they'll wear the One Love armband after they were threatened with sanctions if they did so by FIFA. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Now, back to the briefing and Tom.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, the Prime Minister is to address the annual conference of the Confederation of British Industry within the next hour. The big business lobby group has been campaigning for an updated shortage occupation list to allow more foreign workers to plug labour shortages here in the United Kingdom. This comes, of course, as reports suggest that senior government figures are planning to put Britain on the path towards a Swiss-style relationship with the European Union, accepting many regulations from the bloc into British law, something the government has firmly denied. Now, while the Prime Minister addresses the Remain-campaigning CBI this morning, this afternoon, the Eurosceptic European Research Group is to hold its regular Monday meeting in Westminster. Oh, to be a fly on the wall there. Well, let's explore the week ahead for the Prime Minister and particularly his speech next hour with John Rentoul, the chief political commentator for The Independent. And, John, this came a little bit out of the blue, this story in the Sunday Times that has now bled into other papers this morning. Firm denials from the government, and yet there does seem to be a bit of a ring of truth that there are people in government searching for closer relationships with the European Union.
Yeah, people in so-called senior circles, which I wonder whether those senior circles include the Chancellor himself, because it was Jeremy Hunt who on Friday, I think, on the radio, he was doing a round of interviews after the autumn statement, and he came up with this extraordinary phrase about being confident that he could remove the vast majority of trade barriers between us and the EU. And so we were all scratching our heads as to what that could possibly mean when the Sunday Times produced this, which they defend as an extremely well-sourced story. So I assume it comes from the Chancellor himself, directly or indirectly, in which case I can't work out what he's playing at.
Now, some people are terming this Chequers 2.0 because, of course, if we remember back to Chequers in the summer of 2018, the whole plan from Theresa May was to stay in the regulatory orbit of the European Union but clamp down on migration, something that the leading Brexiteers said was simply not Brexit. It was a misunderstanding of the Brexit vote to think it was all about immigration, because to the leading Brexiteers in this country, it's predominantly about sovereignty, about making our own laws. And Chequers wouldn't have allowed us to do that.
Oh, no, that's nonsense, Tom, as you know. I think the Chequers compromise was a sensible compromise, and it's a great shame that Labour MPs voted against it, because it would have produced what these senior circles seem to want, which is removing trade barriers between us and the EU. But that's not the route we went down. So, and I don't think we can go back. So I'm not quite sure what Jeremy Hunt is playing at.
I suppose the big problem here is that either you do regulatory divergence and you change your rules domestically to make yourself more competitive, to offset the undoubtable trade barriers that come from changing those regulations, or you mirror the regulations of the European Union and you enjoy perhaps a more regulated economy, so less dynamism and growth domestically, but easier trade with the EU. It seems like at the moment we're doing neither. This government is refusing to do the regulatory divergence, the supply-side reform, the scrapping of EU rules to make us more dynamic domestically. But it's taking on all the costs of not aligning to EU rules with none of the benefits.
Well, I think that's quite a good analysis, actually, Tom. I mean, I don't agree with you that I don't think there are any huge benefits to be gained from regulatory divergence. I don't see the point of it, and there obviously isn't any point in it, or else we would have done it. So I would have thought that a closer relationship with the EU was in our economic interest, and if we could have that without being part of the political structures of the EU and without being part of the free movement area, I would have thought that was where the British people would actually prefer to be.
Fundamentally, there's a political difference here, isn't there? There's a group of people in the Conservative Party who want Singapore on Thames, who want a much more deregulated Britain, lower tax, enterprise zoning, sort of Liz Truss-style enterprise economy. And then you've got the sort of perhaps Jeremy Hunt view of the world, which is much more steady and less dynamic.
Well, yes. But Singapore on Thames was never a workable option. And the people pursuing that are pursuing a daydream. But I mean, we don't need to get into the political argument about this. I mean, what is the point of reopening all these arguments now under a prime minister who, the one strong point he has with the Conservative Party is that he was an original Brexiteer, and to reopen all these arguments seems to me an extraordinary political misjudgment.
It is interesting because, of course, we are expecting perhaps Rishi Sunak to try and slap down some of this speculation himself. He's speaking, I believe, at around 10:15. What do you expect his main message to the CBI to be today?
Well, it'll be the usual platitudes, I fear. And everybody will be looking for detailed text analysis of what he says about immigration and the CBI's demand that we should have more of it. Although, it's running at more than 200,000 a year. That was what the OBR forecast for the autumn statement was based on. And I think most British people would say that was high enough. And so I think he's going to resist pressure from the CBI to increase immigration further. And that will presumably satisfy most of his backbenchers.
Well, it'll be a fascinating speech to watch. We'll be bringing it live to our viewers here on GB News. But for now, John Rentoul, thank you very much for joining us this morning on The Briefing. Fascinating stuff there, which we'll be exploring in greater detail at the end of the programme with Nigel Farage. He has got a couple of things to say about this Chequers 2.0 proposal. I will tell you that much. But next today, on Wednesday, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill returns to the House of Commons. Among the amendments MPs have tabled is one from the Conservative MP and former Cabinet Minister Theresa Villiers. It has support from some of her Conservative colleagues, some big names, including Ian Duncan-Smith. Now, primarily concerned with abolishing housing targets alongside other measures, it's been criticised as a wrecking amendment that would try to grind as little house building as there is in this country to a halt. But just how seismic could this amendment be were it to be passed? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Robert Colville, Director of the Centre for Policy Studies, Editor-in-Chief of CapX, and indeed Sunday Times columnist. And Robert, I read your column on Sunday, which seemed to emphasise the magnitude of this amendment. It could be really quite damaging, really bringing down the percentage of house building in this country by up to sort of 40%. How do you arrive at that figure?
So there are basically three things in this country that get houses built. One is the fact that government says to councils, this is how many houses we need according to, across the entire country. And so, here's your share. Can you develop a plan for housing, which meets that? The second thing is that councils have to identify sites within their patch that deliver a 5-year land supply or even longer. I.e., it's not just to say yes, we will build some houses, but here is where we will build them. And the third thing is a thing called the presumption in favour of sustainable development, which basically means that when people put in for planning permission, we generally think it's quite a good idea to have more houses. We should probably say yes, unless there are really good reasons to say no. There are actually loads of amendments that Villiers has put down, but two in particular kill all three of those elements stone dead. They essentially make planning completely voluntary rather than compulsory. And that may sound good if you're, living in in a Tory shire and you're seeing homes built on in pressure, and or like your Theresa Villiers, and you think they're building way too many towers in Barnet or what have you. But what this does is effectively make planning voluntary rather than compulsory, and a series of estimates and a series of experts to say, just by themselves, these things would cause house building to fall by between 20 and 40%, because we are so reliant on these targets to push housing through the system, because there are so many people who don't want houses built near them.
But Robert, you're a free market kind of guy. What do you say to those who say that top-down targets are Stalinist, that we shouldn't have the government telling us how many houses should be built and where, that we should leave it to the market?
But by that token, the entire planning system is Stalinist. We have a situation in which in order to build anything anywhere in this country, you need to humbly petition the government to allow you to do a particular thing with your land. So if you're saying if you're saying top-down targets are not free market, they are Stalinist. Yes, they are. But the entire Town and Country Planning Act is Stalinist. The fact that we have a green belt is Stalinist. We have designated specific bits of the country where it's really, really hard to build anything. National parks are Stalinist. We have said these are particularly beautiful bits of the country where you can't build anything. So you can't take out one element of that and say, haha, we've got rid of the Stalinist bit, because then you're just left with a system where the default is nothing gets built.
So, interestingly, looking at the names on this list, there are some up-and-coming Conservative MPs, as well as some of the sort of former cabinet ministers as well. What do you think the chance is of this amendment getting passed, and indeed, therefore, house building really crashing down to lows that we have not seen in years?
Yeah. Well, let's be clear. House building is crashing down to lows we haven't seen in years because the economy is falling off a cliff and interest rates are going up, and that's what makes this even more damaging. Even without this amendment, people in the industry are expecting house building to halve next year and to take a very long time to recover. So this makes that crash worse. It makes the recession worse. It makes the austerity we need worse. It costs thousands of people of their jobs. The HBF, the industry body, has estimated there would be a £17 billion hit to the economy from these amendments alone. That said, I don't think depending on what Labour do, I don't think this amendment passes. But the problem is that if you get, as we've seen time and time again over the last couple of years, if you get 40, 50, 60 Tory MPs rebelling against the government on something, it forces the government to change its mind. So the danger is less that this specific amendment gets all the way through the legislation, but more that it shows the government that there is an irreducible hardcore of Tory MPs who absolutely do not want any houses built, and it has to adjust planning policy to reflect that.
It's such a shame. This country was built off the back of Victorian infrastructure development, of politicians being proud of creating things in this country, of building things. And now it seems that politicians get political capital off the back of preventing things from being built. The Victorian forefathers of our politicians would be turning in their graves if they could see so many, of all parties, politicians blocking development and
There's
growth
a beautiful
in their
example,
areas.
which is Maria Miller in Basingstoke. She was saying, Basingstoke has taken, 50,000 new houses over the last 50 years. This is too much. The fact is, there wasn't a Basingstoke. Basingstoke was a tiny, tiny community, and we made it a new town. We built 50,000 houses. It's literally pulling up the drawbridge after pulling up the ladder once you've got to the top of it.
Well, we will explore this very, very closely on Wednesday when these amendments are to be tabled in front of that DLUC bill. We'll be following this one closely throughout the week. But for now, Robert Colville, thank you for joining us here on The Briefing this morning. Now to turn our gaze east, as of course Russia's invasion of Ukraine has sent the global economy into a tailspin. Energy price inflation ripples through the West, and desperate food shortages threaten the developing world. But the full-scale invasion of Ukraine wasn't a bolt from the blue. It was the latest in a series of hostile acts from the Russian Federation, stretching back decades. So why does modern Russia behave like this? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Keir Giles, Senior Fellow at Chatham House and author of the new book, Russia's War on Everybody, and What It Means for You. So, Keir Giles, what is Russia's war on everybody?
Well, Tom, I think you just summed it up very well. It is the war, not the one that we see ongoing at high intensity in Ukraine at the moment, but the much longer-term covert war that Russia has been waging against everybody around the world, not just in the West, over decades, as you said. Now, you might recall people got very excited when it looked as though Russian missiles had spilled over from the Ukraine conflict and killed a couple of people in Poland, tragically. But all of that excitement forgets that this is not the first time Russia's military has reached out and killed people across Europe. We think about the incidents in Salisbury in the UK, Dawn Sturgis, the unfortunate individual who died as a result of Russian military intelligence officers trying to carry out operations in our country. Czech Republic, too, has seen sabotage operations which have led to fatalities there. And that's just the high-profile incidents. The problem is that Russia has seen for so long that it's in a state of conflict with the West, with the UK, with its allies, and with other countries around the world. It's stopping at nothing except open military clashes. Those are the one thing that it wants to avoid with the West. In every other way in which it can reach out and harm other countries, it's doing so. And the problem is it's ordinary people that bear the brunt of it. Whether they're interested in Russia or not, they pay the consequences. And that's why the book is called Russia's War on Everybody.
You focus in on Russia as the country, rather than the leadership of Russia, rather than Putin's war on everybody, perhaps. Is there not a case to be made that Russia could be very different, were it to have a different leadership, were Putin not to have risen to the pinnacle of politics in that country at the turn of the century?
Well, people have been trying to make that argument because, of course, naturally we want to think that Russians are, in general, not inclined to behave like this around the world, and it must be an evil leadership that's leading them astray. Unfortunately, if you look at the extent of the support for what Russia is doing among ordinary people within Russia, and then you look back over history at how President Putin isn't inventing all of these ways of dealing with the outside world, he's actually just reinstating them. Russia is moving back into its historical comfort zone of hostility to the West. You realize that actually, no, this is not a Putin problem. It is a far deeper and longer-term Russia problem. And let's not forget that Putin isn't only hurting the outside world, it's also his own population that Russia is now repressing once again. And in that, too, it's moving back into history. It's regressing rapidly back into a much more primitive age.
Now, in the forefront of this book, you write that you actually finished the first draft back in 2021, before people had assumed that any sort of full-scale invasion of Ukraine was even likely. Did you foresee that coming?
It was one of the scenarios that the original draft of the book was warning about, because the pattern has been clear, the trend has been clear. And what we saw already when this book was finished in the second half of last year was Russia suddenly deciding that the time was right to act. You saw this increased confidence and Russia turning away from all of the relationships with the West that previously it had thought was important and pushing for its own preferred outcome to all of these contradictions in security in Europe. And so the original draft said, yes, the likely outcome of this is going to be yet another military clash between Russia and one of its neighbors in exactly the same way as they've done repeatedly over the years. And then, of course, that worst case scenario actually happened. So there was a rewrite of the book to make it plain that this is just one instance of what Russia does to the rest of the world.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating, and the book, of course, is called Russia's War on Everybody, and how and what it means for you. Available, no doubt, in all good bookshops. Keir Giles, thank you very much for joining us this morning on The Briefing. Now, finally, today, let's return to that row over Brexit. And the one and only Nigel Farage has threatened to return to frontline politics if this Swiss-style Chequers 2.0 plan goes ahead. I'm delighted to say that he joins me now. And Nigel, your reaction, first of all, to hearing about this sort of Swiss-style deal being mooted at the top levels of government. Do you think they're really talking about this?
Well, of course, it's a newspaper story, a Sunday story, and you know you can always be sceptical about those. However, there is a ring of truth to this, because ever since Jeremy Hunt was appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer, it has been clear that the globalists, the Remainers, the centre-left Social Democrats are now back in control of the Conservative Party. The free marketeers, the Brexiteers have been routed in their own party. And you could argue that Brexit's been betrayed already to a certain degree. I mean, we've got, illegal immigration running at numbers nobody can even believe, legal immigration running pretty close to all-time highs, and in Hunt's budget, he made it clear he wants those numbers of about $250 million net a year to continue. We've had little deregulation or help for our industries, our businesses, precious little done for our fishermen. So Brexit already is disappointing because of what the Tories have delivered. And frankly, if we're going to head down a route of closer regulatory alignment, it wouldn't surprise me, but it would be a final act of betrayal.
What do you say to those people who say that given that the government has given up on regulatory divergence, on doing things differently, on deregulating and making our economy go gangbusters domestically, given that we've done that, and given that no doubt diverging or leaving the European Union in the way that we have does create some trade barriers with Europe. If we're not then going to use the opportunity to change the rules, we might as well be part of that regulatory orbit.
That is a logical argument. No, Tom, that is an absolutely logical argument. And you know, we're replaying, aren't we, what happened in 2019? We're going through the same process again, because that's what Mrs May's Chequers deal was all about. It was Brino. It was Brexit in name only. If you haven't got the courage to free things up and look to a bigger world and deregulate, then you might just as well stay with the club. The problem for the Conservative Party is this. Whilst I get the logic of that argument, there are still huge numbers of people who voted for something in a free, open democracy and want to see it delivered. And remind you that in 2019, when we did not leave the European Union on March the 29th as promised, the Brexit Party came back and smashed the Conservative Party into their worst national election result in 200 years. What I'm saying, if they want to go through that level of betrayal again, they will be destroyed at the next general election in a way they can't even begin to contemplate.
Well, it's a stark warning there from you, Nigel, presumably that you've done it not once but twice before in terms of beating the Conservatives in a national election when they've strayed from that path. Potentially, that could come round again. Well, Nigel, thank you for ending the show for us today. It's a fascinating story, but of course there'll be much more to come. Rishi Sunak speaking within the next hour at the CBI. Don't go anywhere. That's, of course...
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking wet and windy in the southwest, cold with patchy fog in the northeast. Let's take a look at the details. So a wet and gloomy start to the week across southwest England as a band of heavy rain makes its way northeastwards this morning. Windy there with a risk of gales for coastal areas. It's initially going to be dry for southeast England and London, though rain will move in from the southwest through this morning with some heavy bursts at times. Wet and windy for South Wales as heavy rain pushes across the country, drier for longer in the north and east. After a chilly start to the new week, with some clear spells across the Midlands, rain will quickly spread in from the southwest with some heavy bursts at times, becoming increasingly breezy. A frosty start to Monday across northeast England with patches of fog or freezing fog in places. This may take some time to clear this morning, dry but cloudy as the fog lifts. It'll be a cold start, especially in eastern parts of Scotland, with a frost and fog patches. That fog slowly lifting this morning with a band of cloud and showers affecting eastern coasts. A wet morning across Northern Ireland with bursts of heavy rain that could cause travel disruption in some places, and a windy morning too, with a risk of gales for coastal areas. So rain will continue across southern and central England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and it will be drier further north with showers for eastern areas. And that's how the weather is shaping up for you on this Monday.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White.